Across the vast steppes of Central Asia, where the sky stretches endlessly and the winds howl like ancient spirits, a legend was born. His name was Temüjin. This is not only the story of a conqueror, it is the story of a civilization in motion, of laws and faith, of blood and vision. It is the tale of how one man, guided by destiny and driven by vengeance, reshaped the world. History remembers him as Genghis Khan, the man who rose from hunger and exile to command the largest land empire the world has ever seen. And it begins on the windswept steppes of Mongolia. Chapter 1. The Steppes and the Sky. The Mongolian steppe is a land of extremes. Summers blaze with unforgiving heat. Winters descend with temperatures that can kill a man in hours. The horizon stretches without end, and the sky, vast, eternal, endless, dominates all. Here, nature is both cradle and enemy, provider and destroyer. For centuries, the people of this land lived not in cities of stone, but in tents of felt and wood. The Mongols were nomads. They carried their homes on carts, following the seasons, moving with their herds. Their dwelling, the gyr, known elsewhere as a yurt, was more than a shelter. It was a symbol of survival, a circle that could withstand the howling winds and the shifting earth. Inside, fire burned at the center, smoke rising through a hole to the open sky, a reminder that even the home was connected to the eternal heavens above. Life here was not measured in gold or silver, but in animals, sheep, goats, camels, and above all, horses. Horses were the heartbeat of the steppe. A Mongol could drink a horse's milk, eat its meat, use its hide for clothes, and its bones for tools. To lose one's horses was to lose life itself. Children learned to ride almost as soon as they could stand. By the age of 4, they clung to saddles. By 6, they could command a mount at full gallop. By 10, they were expected to shoot arrows from horseback with deadly precision. The bow was not a toy. It was a lifeline. In a land where hunting, herding, and defense against rivals were constant, children were forged into warriors almost from birth. Their food was plain but powerful. Boiled mutton sustained families. Fermented mare's milk, airag, quenched thirst and provided strength. On long journeys, dried meat and curdled cheese kept men alive for weeks. In hardship, even the blood of a horse, carefully drawn and drunk warm, could keep a rider alive through days without food. But the Mongols were not simply brutes surviving in a wasteland. Their life had rhythm, beauty, and ritual. At dawn, herders sang to their animals. At night, families gathered around fires to share stories of ancestors and gods. They believed in the Tengri, the eternal blue sky, a vast and unknowable force that ruled over fate. Tengri was everywhere, in storms, in winds, in victories, and in defeats. The Khan himself would one day be seen not just as a man, but as chosen by Tengri to carry out heaven's will. Society here was harsh, but it was also flexible. Women held a power that surprised outsiders. While men raided or hunted, women managed herds, made decisions for the clan, and sometimes commanded warriors. A woman could not easily be ignored, for without her, the family could not survive. The Mongols honored strength, whether in men or in women. The land itself shaped their values. Loyalty meant survival. Betrayal meant death. To be exiled was worse than execution, for without a tribe, without herds, a man could not endure the seasons. The people of the steppe learned early that unity was strength. And yet, for centuries, unity eluded them. Tribes raided one another, betrayed alliances, and spilled blood in endless cycles. Outsiders from the Chinese dynasties to the Persian empires looked upon the Mongols with disdain. To them, these horsemen were savages, crude nomads without culture, art, or refinement. But they misunderstood. The Mongols had their own code, their own music, their own poetry sung to the rhythm of hoofbeats. They possessed an endurance that city dwellers could scarcely imagine. In this world of wind and horse and sky, survival forged strength. And into this world, in the year 1162, near the banks of the Onon River, a child was born. The boy entered the world clutching a clot of blood in his tiny fist, an omen among the Mongols that destiny awaited him. His parents named him Temüjin. No one could yet know that this boy, born in a felt tent on the edge of a frozen plain, would rise from hunger and betrayal to shake the foundations of the world. Chapter 2: The Wolf Child of the Steppes. The boy named Temüjin grew up in a world of uncertainty. His very birth had been seen as an omen. To the Mongols, a child born clutching blood was destined for greatness or destruction. But destiny, like the wind over the steppe, is never gentle. Temüjin's father, Yesugei, was a chieftain of the Borjigin clan. His power was modest, yet among the fragmented tribes he commanded respect. His mother, Holun, was a woman of extraordinary will. She had been abducted years earlier from another tribe, torn from her husband and forced to wed Yesugei. Such was the way of the steppe. Power was taken, not given. But Holun adapted as the steppe demanded. She raised her children fiercely, with the strength of a mother who knew survival was never guaranteed. When Temüjin was 9 years old, his father arranged a marriage for him, as was custom, to strengthen alliances. Yesugei took his son across the plains to meet the family of his betrothed. But on the journey home, Yesugei accepted food from rival Tatars, enemies who had long harbored grudges. The food was poisoned. Within days, Temüjin's father was dead. With Yesugei's death, everything collapsed. On the steppe, alliances were fragile, bound by fear more than loyalty. Without the chieftain, his family lost their status. The tribe abandoned Holun and her children. Their herds were stolen, their camp deserted. Suddenly, the family was alone, exiled, stripped of power, condemned to hunger. Temüjin was thrust into a childhood of suffering. With no animals to provide milk or meat, they scoured the land for roots and berries. They fished rivers with crude spears. Hunger gnawed at them constantly. In winter, death was never far. Many families in their situation did not survive, but Holun refused to surrender. She told her children, "We will live. Even if we eat roots, we will endure." Betrayal deepened Temüjin's lessons. Relatives who should have offered aid instead turned against him. His own half-brother, Bekter, threatened his claim to leadership. In a moment that haunted him for the rest of his life, Temüjin killed Bekter with his bow. It was an act of survival, a reminder that even family could become an enemy. The boy learned early that loyalty could not be assumed. Trust was rare, survival depended on vigilance, and betrayal demanded swift punishment. As a teenager, Temüjin's hardships grew. Rival clans captured him. The Tai Chi Ud bound him in a wooden collar, parading him as a slave. To them, he was a boy broken by hunger, a captive destined for humiliation. But even then, Temüjin's will did not break. He bided his time, watching, waiting. One night, under the cover of darkness, he slipped away. A sympathetic guard, perhaps moved by pity, helped him escape. Temüjin fled across the grasslands, still wearing the heavy collar, hiding in rivers and forests until at last he was free. The memory of chains, of humiliation, seared itself into his soul. He swore that never again would he live under another man's power. From these wounds, hunger, exile, betrayal, slavery, the boy was forged into steel. He was not yet a leader, not yet a conqueror, but he carried within him a vow that would echo across the world. One day he would unite the tribes. One day he would make them bow. The wolf child of the steppes was rising. Chapter 3: Brotherhood and Rivalry. As Temüjin grew into manhood, he began to gather companions. Among the steppe tribes, loyalty was fragile, but Temüjin sought to forge something stronger. He believed alliances could be built not on fear, but on trust, not on birth, but on merit. One of his earliest and most important bonds was with Jamuka, a boyhood friend. The two swore the oath of Anda, sacred brotherhood. This ritual bound them as more than allies, more than friends. To be Anda was to be as close as blood, to pledge loyalty until death. Together they dreamed of uniting the fractured tribes of Mongolia. But even as this bond was forged, fate tested Temüjin again. His wife, Berta, whom he had married in his youth, was abducted by the Merkit tribe, who carried her away in revenge for an old insult. For Temüjin, this was more than a personal wound. Berta was his partner, his confidant, and the future mother of his heirs. To lose her was to lose his foundation. Temüjin acted swiftly. He sought aid from his Anda Jamuka and from Tokrul, the Khan of the Keret tribe, who had once been allied with his father. Together, their forces struck against the Merkits in a night attack. The Merkit were overwhelmed and Berta was rescued. Though scarred by her captivity, she remained steadfast at Temüjin's side for the rest of her life. Their marriage became a partnership that would endure betrayal, exile, and empire. This rescue forged a lesson. Alliances could be powerful, but they were fragile. Jamuka and Temüjin, though bound by oath, were very different men. Jamuka clung to the old ways, where noble blood determined power. Temüjin embraced the new, rewarding loyalty and ability above ancestry. It was a vision that threatened the aristocracy of the steppe. For a time, the two ruled together, but the fragile balance broke. Jamuka, fearing Temüjin's growing power, turned against him. What followed was one of the bloodiest rivalries in Mongol history. Jamuka struck suddenly, capturing 70 of Temüjin's men. In a display meant to terrify, he executed them in the most horrific way imaginable, boiling them alive. The screams of those men seared themselves into memory. To Temüjin, this was more than cruelty. It was proof that Jamuka's rule would forever be built on fear. Temüjin's heart hardened. He swore never to rule by cruelty alone, but he also learned that mercy had limits. To hesitate was to invite betrayal. To falter was to die. As he built his following, Temüjin introduced new ways of organizing power. He broke the clans and redistributed men into groups of 10, 100, 1,000. These units were loyal to their commander, not their tribe. In this way, Temüjin shattered the old system of clan rivalries and replaced it with loyalty to himself. This was revolutionary. Men who had once been enemies now fought side by side. Common herders could rise through the ranks, even surpassing nobles if they proved their bravery. Temüjin rewarded merit with promotion and punished betrayal with death. For the first time, warriors began to follow a leader not because of ancestry, but because of vision. Temüjin's rise was slow, bloody, and uncertain. He faced betrayal again and again. Allies deserted him. Rivals plotted his death. But each trial taught him. Each wound hardened him. The boy who had once worn a wooden collar of slavery was now a leader of men. And though Jamuka remained a rival, Temüjin was laying the foundation of something new. A nation of the steppe, bound not by blood, but by law, discipline, and shared destiny. Chapter 4. The Kurultai. The wars of Temüjin's youth scarred the land, but out of their ashes something extraordinary began to emerge. Tribe after tribe, clan after clan, bent their knees to him. Some joined out of loyalty, some out of fear, and others because they saw in Temüjin a leader unlike any they had ever known. By the year 1206, the long years of blood and betrayal had reached a climax. Temüjin summoned the tribes to a great council, a Kurultai. Such councils were not unusual on the steppe. They were gatherings where great decisions were made, alliances sealed, leaders chosen. But this Kurultai would be different. For the first time in history, it was not just a single tribe or clan. It was a gathering of nearly all the steppe peoples. On the day of the Kurultai, the tribes assembled on the open plain. Tens of thousands of horsemen stood in ranks, their banners whipping in the wind. Chiefs and elders sat in circles, shamans beat drums, their chants rising to the sky. The eternal blue sky watched vast and silent as the tribes who had once warred endlessly now came together in unity. Temüjin was brought forth on a white felt carpet, a symbol of purity and honor. He was lifted high, and the voices of the people proclaimed him not merely chieftain, not merely leader, but Khan of Khans. He was given a new name, Genghis Khan. In Mongolian, it meant universal ruler. It was more than a title, it was a destiny. For the first time, the fractured tribes of Mongolia were united under a single leader. But unity on the steppe was fragile. To preserve it, Genghis Khan understood that he could not rely on blood ties alone. He needed law, order, and structure. And so he created the Yasa, a code that would govern not just the battlefield, but every aspect of life. The Yasa forbade theft. It condemned lies. It punished adultery. Betrayal was met with death. Kidnapping of women, a practice long accepted among the tribes, was outlawed. In its place, marriage and family were protected by the state. To a world accustomed to raiding and abduction, this was revolutionary. But the Yasa was not merely a list of prohibitions. It was a new vision of justice. It bound nobles and commoners alike. It offered a foundation of stability in a land that had known only chaos. Equally radical was Genghis Khan's decree on religion. Where other rulers demanded submission to their gods, Genghis declared that all faiths would be free. The eternal blue sky is vast, he said. Let every man worship as he will. Muslims, Buddhists, Christians, and shamans all found protection under his rule. For the first time, religion ceased to be a weapon of division on the steppe. He also reorganized his people into a new kind of army and a new kind of society. Gone were the days when men fought only beside their kin. Instead, he divided his people into units of tens, hundreds, thousands, and tens of thousands. Families were split among these units. Old clan loyalties dissolved. Every man's first loyalty was now to his commander, and through him to the Khan. This system ensured discipline and loyalty, but it also created opportunity. A herdsman could rise to command if he proved himself. Courage was rewarded, cowardice punished, regardless of ancestry. Merit became the path to power. It was a revolution on the steppe. The old aristocracy, based on noble birth, was shattered. In its place stood a nation bound by law, discipline, and vision. Genghis Khan also instituted systems of communication and administration. Messengers on swift horses could carry orders across hundreds of miles. Scouts ranged ahead to gather intelligence. Decisions were made quickly and enforced ruthlessly. It was not yet an empire, but it was a state, unlike anything the steppe had seen. At the Kurultai of 1206, the Mongols ceased to be a loose confederation of tribes. They became a nation, a war machine, a civilization in motion. And at its head stood Genghis Khan, no longer the hungry boy of the Onon River, no longer the captive in the wooden collar, but the ruler of a people reborn. The wolf child of the steppes had become the universal ruler, and the world beyond Mongolia was about to feel the thunder of his armies. Chapter 5. Forging an Empire. The unification of the tribes was only the beginning. To hold together the largest alliance the steppe had ever seen, Genghis Khan knew he needed more than words. He needed a system, laws, discipline, and structure that would bind his people together as tightly as the girth of a saddle. The foundation of this system was the decimal organization. Every man was placed into a unit of 10, known as an arban. 10 arbans formed a zun, 100 men. 10 zuns formed a mingan, 1,000, and 10 mingans formed a tumen, a force of 10,000. This structure was revolutionary. It destroyed the old system of clan-based loyalty. Brothers, cousins, and clansmen were deliberately separated, scattered into different units. A man no longer fought only beside his kin. He fought beside strangers who became his brothers in arms. Loyalty flowed upward from the arban to the zun, to the mingan, to the tumen, and ultimately to the Khan himself. The decimal system was not merely military, it was social. Families were redistributed into these units as well, ensuring that every household was tied to the Khan's new order. Even the most ancient bloodlines could not escape the system. No man, no family, no tribe stood apart. This structure created more than unity. It created discipline. Each man was accountable not only to himself, but to the 9 others in his arban. If one fled battle, all could be punished. If one excelled, all were rewarded. The success of the group depended on collective responsibility. But Genghis Khan was not content with structure alone. He demanded meritocracy. Promotions were given not to nobles, but to those who proved themselves in battle. A shepherd could rise to lead 100 if his courage and skill merited it. A man born to obscurity could rise to greatness. It was a radical break with the aristocratic traditions of the steppe. At the same time, Genghis Khan enforced his laws, the yasa, with ruthless consistency. Theft was punished severely. Betrayal was met with death. Adultery, considered a crime against family and order, was not tolerated. And yet, the yasa also offered protections unusual for the time. Women could not be abducted. Religious freedom was guaranteed. Envoys and ambassadors, once seen as expendable, were now considered sacred, their lives protected by the Khan's decree. Justice was not abstract. It was immediate, visible, and unforgettable. Stories spread of men executed for stealing a sheep, or of entire families punished for betrayal. To outsiders, it seemed harsh. To the Mongols, it was necessary. In a land where survival depended on trust, order was life, and order extended beyond the battlefield. Genghis Khan created a primitive but efficient postal system, the yam. Relay stations were established across the steppe, stocked with fresh horses. Couriers could ride from one station to the next, switching mounts, carrying messages with incredible speed. Orders from the Khan could travel hundreds of miles in days, binding a vast empire together. Diplomacy was also central to his rule. Genghis Khan sent envoys to neighboring states, offering peace in exchange for submission. Those who accepted were rewarded with trade and protection. Those who refused were marked for conquest. The choice was clear: bend the knee and prosper, or resist and face annihilation. Yet even in diplomacy, Genghis showed pragmatism. He did not demand cultural assimilation. He cared little what language his subjects spoke, what gods they worshipped, or what customs they practiced. All he demanded was loyalty, tribute, and obedience to his laws. In return, he offered protection and the stability of his Pax Mongolica. Women, too, played crucial roles in his growing empire. Berta, his wife, advised him on political matters. His daughters, often overlooked by chroniclers, were married into alliances that secured vast swathes of territory. In his absence, women sometimes governed entire regions. To Genghis Khan, power was pragmatic. It belonged to those who could wield it effectively, whether man or woman. But perhaps the most important element of Genghis Khan's empire was not laws, nor structure, nor diplomacy, but vision. He believed the Mongols were destined for greatness under the eternal blue sky. He believed that division had weakened them, and unity could make them invincible. He believed that conquest was not mere raiding, but the fulfillment of heaven's will. From this vision came an army unlike any the world had seen. Every warrior carried a composite bow, powerful enough to pierce armor at 300 yards. They carried lances, sabers, and lassos for capturing enemies. Each man kept multiple horses, rotating them so that the army could ride day and night without rest. Their mobility was unmatched. Their discipline was absolute. Orders were followed without question. Punishments for disobedience were swift and merciless, yet the rewards were generous. Spoils of war were divided fairly, not hoarded by the aristocracy. A poor herdsman could become rich through courage. A loyal warrior could rise to command thousands. The Mongols became not just a nation, but a war machine, a civilization in motion, powered by horses, bows, and discipline, bound by law, and driven by destiny. And now, with his people forged into an unbreakable order, Genghis Khan turned his gaze outward. The world beyond Mongolia was vast, rich, and divided. China to the east, Persia to the west, kingdoms of Islam, Christendom, and beyond. The eternal blue sky had given him unity. Now it demanded expansion. The steppe was too small for the vision of a man who would conquer the world. Chapter 6: The Eastern Wars. For centuries, the Chinese dynasties had looked northward at the steppe peoples with a mixture of fear and disdain. The nomads were fierce, unpredictable, and destructive. But in the eyes of the Chinese, they were also primitive, lacking the refinement of great cities, palaces, and scholarship. The Great Wall itself had been built in part to hold them back. But by the time Genghis Khan had united the Mongols, the old assumptions were about to shatter. The horsemen who once raided for plunder were no longer scattered tribes. They were a disciplined nation, bound by law, driven by vision, and organized into the most formidable fighting machine the steppe had ever produced. Their first test came against the Xia dynasty in the northwest. The Tanguts of Xia possessed fortified cities, walls, and armies trained in traditional Chinese warfare. But against the Mongols, their defenses crumbled. The speed and coordination of the Mongol cavalry overwhelmed them, sweeping through open terrain with devastating strikes. The Mongols besieged their cities, cutting off supplies, battering walls, and unleashing terror until the Tanguts submitted. But Genghis was not content with a single victory. His gaze turned next to the Jin dynasty, rulers of northern China, heirs to centuries of civilization. The Jin commanded massive armies, skilled archers, and fortified capitals that seemed impregnable. They possessed cities of stone, markets filled with silks and spices, treasuries overflowing with wealth. To the Mongols, it was as though they had ridden into another world. At first, the Jin underestimated their enemies. They believed the nomads would scatter at the sight of towering walls and disciplined infantry. But the Mongols were no longer mere raiders. They adapted quickly, learning from every defeat, every siege, every captured engineer. The Mongols surrounded cities and starved them into submission. They employed siege towers, catapults, and battering rams, technology they had never used before but had now mastered. They hurled great stones, smashing through walls. They lobbed firebombs of oil-soaked cloth, setting defenses ablaze. They dug tunnels beneath fortifications, collapsing entire walls into dust. Genghis Khan understood that knowledge was as valuable as conquest. Captured engineers were not executed, but pressed into service. Chinese siege experts, Persian craftsmen, and Central Asian smiths were absorbed into the Mongol war machine, making it stronger with every victory. The Mongols also exploited psychology. They spread terror deliberately, slaughtering some cities as examples, sparing others that submitted quickly. Refugees fleeing their destruction carried tales of horror, weakening enemy morale before battles even began. To the Jin, the Mongols seemed unstoppable, demons from the north who could not be contained. The battles were brutal. One by one, Jin strongholds fell. The Mongols struck deep into Chinese territory, burning towns, capturing fortresses, and tearing apart armies many times their size. In open battle, the Mongol cavalry devastated the heavy infantry of the Jin, surrounding them, cutting off their supplies, striking and retreating with impossible speed. But the most dramatic confrontation came at Zhongdu, the great Jin capital, known today as Beijing. Zhongdu was one of the richest cities in the world, with walls that stretched for miles, defended by tens of thousands of soldiers. The Mongols surrounded it in a vast ring. For months, they cut off all supplies, starving the inhabitants. Catapults hurled stones day and night, shaking the earth with their impact. Fires raged within the city. Disease spread. Finally, after relentless pressure, Zhongdu fell. The Mongols stormed through its gates, unleashing slaughter and fire. Chronicles tell of corpses piled high, of streets running red with blood. To the Mongols, it was both vengeance and a warning. Resistance would be punished with annihilation. The fall of Zhongdu shocked the world. A nomadic army had crushed one of the greatest cities of Asia. The myth of Chinese superiority was shattered. The Mongols had proven that they were not mere raiders, but conquerors capable of destroying empires. And yet, Genghis Khan was not blind to the wealth and knowledge of China. He absorbed its technologies, its scholars, its artisans. The Mongols were not interested in ruling as foreigners over a broken land. They wanted to use the resources of China to fuel further conquest. The plunder of Jin cities filled Mongol treasuries, and their knowledge enriched the growing empire. The conquest of Xia and Jin was not just a military triumph. It was a transformation. The Mongols, once defined by their mobility and horsemanship, had become masters of siegecraft, capable of breaking the mightiest walls. They had gone from raiders to empire builders. And with their eastern flank secured, Genghis Khan turned his eyes west. Beyond the deserts and mountains lay Persia, Central Asia, and the Islamic world, lands of wealth, power, and pride. The eternal blue sky had given him victory in the east. Now it demanded vengeance in the west. Chapter 7: The Vengeance in the West. By the year 1218, Genghis Khan's empire stretched across much of northern China and the vast steppes of Central Asia. His people had grown rich with plunder, and his armies had become a finely tuned engine of conquest. But it was a single insult, more than any hunger for wealth, that would drive the Mongols westward into one of the most brutal campaigns in history. To the west lay the Khwarezm Empire, a vast Islamic state stretching across Persia and Central Asia, ruled by Shah Ala ad-Din Muhammad II. The Khwarezmian realm was wealthy, powerful, and proud. Its cities were jewels of the Silk Road, Otrar, Bukhara, Samarkand, great centers of learning, commerce, and culture. Genghis Khan did not initially plan to conquer them. Instead, he sought trade. He sent a caravan of merchants laden with goods to open diplomatic relations. The caravan was welcomed into the city of Otrar, but suspicion festered. The governor of the city, Inalchuk, accused them of spying. The merchants were arrested. Their goods were seized. Then, in an act that violated every law of diplomacy, the men were executed. When Genghis Khan learned of this, he did not immediately declare war. Instead, he sent 3 envoys to the Shah himself, demanding justice and the punishment of Inalchuk. The Shah's response sealed his empire's fate. One envoy was executed. The others were humiliated, their beards burned, their dignity stripped away. For Genghis Khan, this was unforgivable. Among the Mongols, envoys were sacred. To harm them was to break the very order of heaven. He gathered his commanders, his sons, and his generals. His voice was cold, his words sharp as arrows. "They have taken my men. I will take their world." In 1219, the Mongol horde swept westward. Perhaps 200,000 horsemen thundered across the steppes, joined by siege engineers, Chinese catapults, and an intelligence network that stretched for miles. The Khwarezmian armies, though numerous, were unprepared for the storm that was about to break. Their first target was Otrar, the city where the insult began. The Mongols surrounded it, cutting off supplies. Siege engines battered the walls. For 5 months, the defenders held out, but in the end, Otrar fell. Its governor, Inalchuk, was captured. For his betrayal, Genghis Khan ordered a punishment as symbolic as it was cruel. Molten silver was poured into his eyes and ears, a reminder that greed had led to his downfall. From there, the Mongols advanced like fire across dry grass. Bukhara was next. It was one of the most magnificent cities of Islam, a center of learning and piety. When the Mongols approached, its defenders gathered in the mosque, praying for deliverance. But the storm arrived nonetheless. The city fell swiftly, its defenses crumbling. In the mosque of Bukhara, Genghis Khan himself stood before the terrified survivors. His words, recorded by chroniclers, became infamous. "If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." To the faithful of Islam, the Khan presented himself not as a barbarian, but as the scourge of heaven itself. From Bukhara, the horde swept to Samarkand, the jewel of Central Asia. Its walls were strong, its army vast, but it was no match for Mongol discipline. For days, siege engines hammered the city, tunnels collapsed its walls. When the final breach was made, the Mongols surged inside, the streets filled with blood. Tens of thousands were slaughtered. The city that had once been a shining light of culture was reduced to ash. As news of the devastation spread, terror rippled across the Khwarezmian Empire. Entire cities surrendered without resistance, hoping to avoid the fate of Samarkand. But Genghis Khan's wrath was not easily appeased. The Mongols pursued the Shah himself, who fled in desperation across his empire. He abandoned city after city, retreating deeper into Persia, until finally he escaped across the Caspian Sea, where he died in obscurity, a ruler broken by fear. The Mongols, meanwhile, did not stop. They split their forces, chasing down armies, burning cities, and leaving ruin in their wake. Some chronicles claim that in a single campaign, more than 1 million lives were lost. Towns that had stood for centuries vanished. Irrigation systems, the lifeblood of Central Asia, were destroyed, leaving fertile lands to wither into desert. And yet, amid the destruction, the Mongols demonstrated a kind of ruthless pragmatism. Artisans, craftsmen, and scholars were spared. They were sent east to enrich the Mongol state, building weapons, palaces, and knowledge for their conquerors. Merchants were protected, their caravans encouraged to move under Mongol banners. Genghis Khan destroyed those who defied him, but he welcomed those who submitted. The Khwarezm campaign was more than a war. It was an apocalypse. It sent shockwaves through the Islamic world, reshaping borders, economies, and memory. For centuries, poets and historians would recall the terror of the horsemen from the east, the destruction of Samarkand, the burning of Bukhara, the endless columns of refugees fleeing fire and sword. By the time the campaign ended, the Khwarezm Empire was shattered, its cities in ruins, its ruler dead. The Mongols had announced themselves not just as conquerors, but as a force of nature, a punishment from heaven, unstoppable and absolute. And yet, for Genghis Khan, this was only one chapter. The eternal blue sky had given him vengeance. Now it demands more. Beyond Persia lay the lands of the Rus, the kingdoms of Europe, the cities of Islam, and the riches of India. The world itself seemed to tremble before the rising storm. Chapter 8: The Shadow over Europe. As the fires of Persia smoldered, the Mongols pressed further westward. Their armies were no longer just a nomadic horde. They were an empire on the move, carrying with them Chinese engineers, Persian craftsmen, and steppe warriors, hardened by conquest. Wherever they rode, the ground shook. The first to feel the weight of this storm were the Rus principalities, a patchwork of cities and princes spread across the forests and rivers of what is now Russia and Ukraine. The Rus had fought nomadic invaders before, Pechenegs, Cumans, and others, but none were like the Mongols. In 1223, Mongol scouts under Subutai and Jebi, two of Genghis Khan's greatest generals, clashed with a coalition of Rus princes at the Battle of the Kalka River. The Rus, numbering tens of thousands, believed their heavy cavalry could crush the nomads. The Mongols feigned retreat, luring their enemies into pursuit across the plains. For 9 days the Rus chased them, growing overconfident, stretching their forces thin. Then, at the chosen moment, the Mongols turned. From the horizon, dust rose, horns blared, arrows blackened the sky. The Mongols encircled their enemies, trapping them in a tightening ring of death. The Rus army was annihilated. Thousands were slaughtered. Princes were captured and executed, suffocated beneath planks as Mongols feasted above them. A grim reminder of what awaited those who defied the Khan. The victory at Kalka was a warning, a glimpse of what was to come. But for a time the Mongols withdrew, called east to deal with other campaigns. Europe exhaled in relief, believing perhaps the storm had passed. But it did not. By the 1230s, Mongol armies returned, stronger than before. Subutai led them across the frozen rivers and snowy plains where their horses thrived even in winter. They struck the cities of the Rus with unrelenting ferocity. Kiev, once a jewel of Slavic civilization, fell in 1240. Its churches were burned, its treasures looted, its people massacred. Chronicles tell of corpses littering the streets, of survivors dragged into slavery. From the ashes of the Rus, the Mongols surged westward. In 1241, their armies entered Poland and Hungary, the heart of Europe. They struck Krakow, burning the city to the ground. At the Battle of Legnica, a combined force of Poles, Germans, and Teutonic knights stood against them. The Europeans fought bravely, but discipline faltered against the precision of Mongol tactics. Once again, the feigned retreat drew knights into chaos. Once again, arrows rained like thunder. Once again, the encirclement closed. The European army was destroyed. Simultaneously, at the Battle of Mohi in Hungary, another Mongol army crossed the Sajo River under cover of darkness, building a pontoon bridge while launching assaults from multiple directions. The Hungarians, confident in their numbers, were crushed. Chroniclers described the carnage as rivers running red, the fields covered in the bodies of men and horses alike. For Christendom, it was as though demons had emerged from the east. Priests preached that the Mongols were the scourge of God, a punishment for the sins of mankind. Some believed the horsemen were the armies of Gog and Magog, unleashed from the end of the earth to herald the apocalypse. Panic swept across Europe. Kings and popes sent desperate letters, calling for unity against the invaders. And yet, just as Europe braced for destruction, the storm stopped. The Mongols withdrew, pulling back from the very gates of Germany and Austria. The reason lay not in European strength, but in events far away on the steppes. In 1227, Genghis Khan himself had died, his body carried back to Mongolia in secret. His death was kept hidden until his generals could stabilize the empire. By 1241, when Europe seemed ready to fall, another great death shook the Mongols, that of Ogedei, Genghis Khan's chosen successor. According to tradition, all princes of the blood had to return to Mongolia to elect a new great Khan. The armies that had crushed Poland and Hungary turned back, retreating across the steppes. Europe, trembling on the edge of annihilation, was spared not by its own power, but by the need for the Mongols to return home. The shadow lifted, but the memory remained. To Europeans, the Mongols were forever etched in memory as the scourge of God, horsemen from the end of the world, who had come like a storm and vanished just as suddenly. Yet for the Mongols, this was not the end. Their empire still stretched from the Yellow Sea to the Caspian. Their armies still rode in every direction. And though Genghis Khan was gone, his legacy was alive, carried by his sons and grandsons. The eternal blue sky had taken him back, but the world he had forged was only beginning to shape history. Chapter 9. The Death of the Khan. By the late 1220s, Genghis Khan was the master of an empire unlike anything the world had seen. From the shores of the Pacific to the mountains of Persia, from the frozen forests of Siberia to the deserts of Central Asia, his banners flew. His armies had shattered kingdoms, burned cities, and humbled rulers who once believed themselves invincible. But for all his triumphs, Genghis Khan's ambition did not rest. To the east, the Jin dynasty still resisted in northern China. To the west, remnants of the Khwarezmian forces still lurked. And in the south, the lands of the Jia dynasty, once humbled but rebellious again, threatened to defy him. In 1226, Genghis Khan launched what would be his final campaign, the war against the Western Xia. The Tanguts had submitted once before, but now, sensing Mongol attention drawn elsewhere, they had refused to provide troops for his campaigns. To Genghis Khan, this was treachery, and treachery demanded punishment. The Mongol armies swept into Xia territory like a storm. Fortresses were surrounded, walls battered down, fields burned, city after city fell. Chroniclers wrote that entire populations were exterminated, their lands left desolate. The Tanguts, who had once stood proud, were systematically destroyed. But during this campaign, fate struck back. The exact details remain shrouded in mystery, for the Mongols kept their secrets well. Some say that Genghis Khan fell from his horse during battle, grievously injured in the saddle. Others whisper that he was assassinated, wounded in a skirmish with the Tanguts. Still others, legends born of centuries of retelling, claim stranger stories, that he was killed by lightning or cursed by a captured princess. What is certain is this. In 1227, during the siege of a Xi stronghold, Genghis Khan died. He was around 65 years old, a long life by the standards of the steppe. And yet his death seemed sudden, almost unthinkable. The man who had bent nations to his will, who had risen from exile and chains to command the largest empire in history, was gone. But even in death, he shaped the world. His passing was kept a secret. His generals, fearing chaos, concealed the news until the campaign was complete. They continued to fight, continued to burn and conquer in his name, ensuring that his last wish, the destruction of the Xia, was carried out in full. When at last his body was prepared for burial, it was carried back to Mongolia in silence. The funeral procession was unlike any in history. To preserve secrecy, to protect the sanctity of their Khan, the Mongols executed all who crossed their path. Travelers, peasants, even witnesses by chance, none were allowed to live. The body of Genghis Khan moved across the steppe like a shadow, unseen, unstoppable, leaving only silence behind. Where he was buried remains one of history's greatest mysteries. Some say he was laid to rest beneath the sacred mountain of Burkin Khaldun, hidden in the forests where he had once taken refuge as a boy. Others claim he was buried in a secret tomb, covered by earth and trees, guarded by warriors sworn to kill any who approached. Legends even tell of a river diverted over his grave so that no trace would remain. No monument was raised, no stone carved, no tomb uncovered. The eternal blue sky had taken him back, and the earth itself swallowed his remains. For centuries, men have searched for the tomb of Genghis Khan. None have found it. Perhaps it lies beneath the roots of the forest, perhaps beneath the sands of the desert. Perhaps it is better left undiscovered, for the Mongols believed that his rest was sacred, protected by heaven. What is certain is that with his death, the man was gone, but the empire lived on. His sons and grandsons inherited not only his conquests, but his vision. The system he created, the laws he enforced, the army he forged, all endured. Ogedei, his son, would take up the mantle of Great Khan. Batu, his grandson, would ride west to devastate Europe. Kublai, another grandson, would conquer China and rule from Beijing. The empire would expand even beyond Genghis's wildest dreams. And yet, no matter how vast the Mongol Empire became, no matter how far his descendants carried his banner, the figure of Genghis Khan remained at its heart. The man who had risen from hunger and exile, who had united the steppe and conquered kingdoms, who had died on campaign, undefeated, became a legend. The wolf child of the steppes was gone. The universal ruler had returned to the sky. But his shadow would stretch across the world for centuries to come. Monster or maker? Across the centuries, few names strike the human imagination like that of Genghis Khan. He was the wolf child born into exile, the warrior who rose from chains, the conqueror who bent half the known world to his will. His life is a saga of survival and ambition, of betrayal answered with vengeance, of vision carried on horseback across continents. And yet, his legacy is not simple. To his enemies, he was a monster, the destroyer who left cities in ruins, who ordered slaughter on a scale so vast it seemed biblical. In the chronicles of Persia, he is remembered as a punishment from God, a scourge sent to chastise the proud. In the annals of Europe, he is a terror from the east, a horseman of the apocalypse. In the ruins of Samarkand, in the ashes of Zhongdu, his name became a curse whispered with fear. But to his people, he was the maker, the lawgiver who ended the endless tribal wars of the steppe, who gave them unity, justice, and order. He was the protector who outlawed the kidnapping of women, who guaranteed freedom of religion, who rewarded merit instead of birth. He was the visionary who opened the Silk Road, who made it possible for a merchant to travel from the Pacific to the Mediterranean under a single banner of protection. Under his empire, knowledge and technology spread: paper money, printing, gunpowder, medicine, ideas carried by caravans across lands once divided. A farmer in China and a merchant in Baghdad lived in a world suddenly connected, their fates linked by Mongol horsemen patrolling the roads. For a brief time, the world felt smaller, more unified than it had for centuries. And even in the silence of his tomb, Genghis Khan's presence remains. His body was hidden, his grave unmarked, his resting place lost forever. Yet his blood flows through millions. Genetic studies suggest that as many as 1 in every 200 men alive today carries his lineage. His descendants built empires from Russia to China, from Persia to India. His laws influenced kingdoms long after the Mongol Empire fractured. His strategies are still studied in war colleges around the world. So what was he? A destroyer, yes. A man who burned and killed, who turned flourishing lands into deserts, who left behind a trail of corpses. But also a builder, a man who created order from chaos, who built a system that connected East and West, who forged an empire that, for all its brutality, reshaped civilization itself. Perhaps that is the truth of the empire. It is always born in blood. It is always sustained by power. And yet, from its violence, new worlds emerge. Genghis Khan was not merely a man. He was a force of history, as vast as the steppes, as relentless as the wind, as eternal as the sky. He burned the world, but from its ashes a new one rose. This was Genghis Khan, the man who conquered the world.